Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Marlies, Marley Design. Yeah, and look what is in front of me. The new Tim Holtz Watercolor Pencils. The 3 new sets. Set 4, Set 5 and Set 6. That also means set 1, 2 and 3 are already out there, and the whole distress line with 72 colors will be completed with these 3 new sets. So all the names that you might know from the inks or from the sprays are also in here, like pumice stone, worn lipstick or broken china and ground espresso. I could talk very long about these beautiful pencils and what they can do, but if you have not seen it yet, Tim just did a live on these 3 sets of watercolor pencils where he shows you the pencils and explains the features and what you can do with them. But I would also bring something to the table. And for me that means no more talking and no more explaining about these watercolor pencils, but doing, creating and get going. And there is no better way than to show you some techniques with these watercolor pencils so you can get a jump start right away. Shall we start with our first technique? Let's go for our first technique with a stamp. I will use this stamp set from Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous, Botanical and Batik CMS 327, and this one has my preference. The surface where I'm going to stamp on is some watercolor paper, and I will stamp on the smooth side. And from the distressed watercolor pencils I will use the Uncharted Mariner and Pine Needles. I have placed my watercolor paper on top of my stamping platform. I like to work on my stamp platform because that gives me the opportunity to stamp more than once on the same spot. I have placed my stamp on top and I will pick the stamp up with the lid of the platform. I will use my 2 watercolor pencils to color on top of the raised areas of the stamp. My stamp is totally colored, so now I will spray some water on top to activate the watercolor pencils, and then I will stamp. This is our first impression. It is very light. It is too light to my liking, so I will spray some more water on top of the stamp to find out if I can get more color of it on the paper. Here you can see that our second impression is already better, but I still want more color on top of the paper. While my stamp is still a bit wet, I will go back in with my watercolor pencils and give it an extra layer of color. Yes, and this is exactly what I wanted. That means we have tried 2 different things. First, color the stamp with dry watercolor pencils, wet it down with a water bottle sprayer, and the impression was very light. The second thing that we did was to add some extra watercolor pencil on top of our wet stamp, and that gave us this result. So we have already learned that with a bit more water, the impression, well, in my opinion, is better. This was our first try with a background stamp. You can do the same technique just on a single stamp. I will stamp on these labels. I have made these labels with the Tim Holtz and Stampers Anonymous label frame set and with the Distress Ink Scorched Timber. In the frames I would like to stamp with this Wildflower Stamp set, and the number is CMS 253. And I will keep my colors in the same color scheme, so I'm going to use the Uncharted Mariner and the Pine Needles again. I have chosen my stamp and I will spray it down with a bit of water before I'm going in with my pencils. Wow, and just look at the watercolor effect. Yeah, that is so, so beautiful. Let's do the other two. And this is the effect. I really like it. It really looks like watercolor and that it is like hand painted or something like that. Very, very pretty. So what could you do with these labels? You could use them in your journals. You can use them on a card, on a background. You can create a pocket out of it. More than enough possibilities. Okay, let's go to our next technique. And I will show you a technique with some texture fades, 3D embossing folders. This is the one that I'm going to use. And the number is 665733. I will run the embossing folder through my machine with some watercolor paper, and after that I will color the raised areas with my watercolor pencils. Chipped sapphire, tea dye, ground espresso. So what have I done? I have played around with these three colors. First I began with a chipped sapphire, then the tea dye, and then the ground espresso. Then you can see what kind of reaction you will get. If it's not to your liking, just try to add some more of the pencil. So I did. I made the pencils a bit more wet and went on top of those raised areas. And I also found out that with my darkest color, the ground espresso, I have pulled it into those creases a little bit more, so the background also contains some color. After that, there was a lot of color on top, all three colors, and that is what I sprayed down with some water, so the colors could run. The paper is quite wet at the moment, so I will put it to the side so it can air dry. And after drying time, this is the result. Of course, I have taken an embossing folder with small and tiny details. So if you want to play with this technique, also try out some other embossing folders where you have like larger areas, like big leaves or something like that. And just give it a try. I will do a second technique also with an embossing folder, and I have chosen this one. The Tim Holtz 3D embossing folder numbered. And the number of this folder is 665753. I have opened up my embossing folder. Now I will take my pencils and I will color in this whole area. The coloring is done. I will spray it with a bit of water. I will place my paper inside the embossing folder and I will run it through my machine. Wow, and look at that. Look how crazy cool. And I did one extra thing for you to show you the difference. I have inked up this side of the tag with my Distress Ink Scorched Timber. And I did not do that on the left side of the tag. And look how grungy that looks. My next technique will be done with a stencil and the watercolor pencils. I will use this Tim Holtz stencil and the number is THS148. And the two watercolor pencils that I will use are Ripe Persimmon and Scorched Timber. I will also use a lightweight mixed media paper and this is 190 grams. This technique is so easy, simple and fun that I made another paper right away with the colors Pumice Stone and Lucky Clover. And the thing that I love the most is that the paper has a sketchy effect. For my next technique I will also use a stencil, some watercolor cardstock Distress from Tim Holtz, and my watercolor pencils Aged Mahogany and Worn Lipstick. I have taped down my stencil so I can keep everything in the same place. And now I will use my watercolor pencils to fill in those open, larger areas of the stencil. I will activate the color with my water brush. I have let the paper air dry, but it is not totally dry. So now I'm going back in with my watercolor pencil to give it some more color. So I have put on a second layer of the worn lipstick. I have wet it down with my water brush, and now while the paper is still wet I will go in with my Aged Mahogany. I would also like some splattering on top, so I got out my Distress watercolor pencil Scorched Timber. I will wet the tip I will swipe some color of the tip on top of my paper. I have placed the stencil back on the paper, a little bit offset to the right side, and now I want to accentuate those circles. I will do that with a Pigma Micron Pen 04. I really love the result. It's a little bit like in an artistic way, working in a loose way, no perfection needed. I like the lines. I made double lines and I did not follow along the circle lines, but yeah, I went a little bit like crooked and a little bit wiggly, and this is really a fun way to make a background. My next technique is related into working with a botanical theme. I will use the Distress Watercolor Pencil Weathered Wood, and I will hand draw some leaves onto the paper. When I'm done with drawing, I will activate the color with my water brush. My leaves are done with the first color, but I would also like to create some contrast. So I will try to create some darker areas with the Distress Watercolor Pencil Uncharted Mariner. Now that my flowers are done and there are little splatters on top, I would also like to accentuate some of the edges of the paper. So I will swipe my watercolor pencil, the Uncharted Mariner, along the sides, and I will activate the color with my water bottle sprayer. To accentuate the leaves, I will make a sketchy outline with my Pigma Micron pen 04. I really enjoy this technique because you can let go of perfectionism, you can be loose in your art style, and you do not have to strive for an image that is crisp and clear. And for now I only used some blue tones, but yeah, you can imagine when you play around with different kind of colors, you will get a beautiful botanical style in a free and loose artsy way. My next technique is also about coloring. I had a little piece of leftover paper, and on top I have glued the Tim Holtz Ideology collage paper Entomology. I glued the collage paper down with the Distress Collage medium. To color the background, I found 3 colors of the watercolor pencils: pine needles, brushed corduroy, and gathered twigs. Our colored collage paper is done. I really like the effect. It really looks vintage to me, and with the splattering that I did at last, you can make it more vintage or worn and stained. But besides coloring collage paper with the watercolor pencils, you can also color your stamped images. So I would suggest, if you do not have the collage paper, dive into your stamping sets and get out some of the stamps and use this technique to color in your stamps. And now look at this beautiful overview of all the watercolor pencil techniques that we just did. That looks amazing. From stamping, using embossing folders and stencils, hand-drawn leaves, and coloring your images. And what I have showed you today is not even everything that you can do with the watercolor pencils, but I just wanted to give you a jump start so you can get going as soon as your water pencils arrive at the door and you can have some creative time for yourself. The only thing I would like to mention before this video is coming to an end is that I have used one of my distress ink pads, the Scorched Timber, to ink up most of my papers. And also keep in mind, this is just a basic paper, maybe a background. That means that you can work on these papers even further. Add more mediums to them, like ink or paint, add a backing paper, or add a focal point on top. Possibilities are endless. When you made it this far into the video and you are wondering where you can get your watercolor pencils, I will put all the supplies in my description box below. Also in my description box you can find all my links to my socials and my coffee shop. That way you can check me and my work out to get to know me better. I hope you got the inspiration you needed to get started with your water pencils yourself. When you did, please like, subscribe or comment down below. Thank you for spending time on my channel and have a great day. Bye!